Thank you for joining us this morning on Coffee Time with Masterminds. Some states are starting to plan to reopen, but it's not as simple as rolling back to how we did business in January. So what should the leaders of mission-based organizations be thinking about right now? In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the planning that it takes to reopen our doors. And we have two guests on our show today who are going to help us identify the areas we could begin to focus on as we plan to come back to our physical spaces. We invite you to grab a cup of coffee and join us for a conversation for the next half hour as we discuss topics that are important to the leaders of mission-based organizations. Please join the conversation in the comments. We really appreciate your questions and feedback. We're going to start with introductions, so please tell us who you are and where you're joining from. My name is Peta Blakely. I am the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting, and I help mission-based organizations measure and maximize their impact. Rebecca and Cynthia are with me today. Rebecca, how are you?
I'm well. How are you, Peta? How are you, Cynthia? Good morning.
Good.
Good morning.
My name's Rebecca Tuttle. I'm the founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good. We help schools, nonprofits, organizations, and businesses find, write, and secure grant funding, and we teach you how to do it.
And we're joined by Cynthia. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, Rebecca. Hi, Peta. Hi, Facebook. Hi, everybody. Yay, it's Friday.
Yeah.
I'm Cynthia Rojas and founder and principal of To Your Growth, which is a consulting firm that specializes in organizational development, change management, and leadership development. Welcome to Coffee Time.
Today, we are joined by our guest, Cornell Wright, principal of the Parker Wright Group in Connecticut. Cornell is a trainer, executive coach, and management consultant with more than 30 years of experience in both large corporations and small businesses. He's a member of the adjunct faculty at Housatonic Community College in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He teaches courses on consumer behavior, organizational management, and customer service. Since 2008, he's written a business column called Plan Well and Execute in the New Haven Register in New Haven, Connecticut. Thanks for joining us, Cornell. Today, we're talking about the top considerations for leaders who are planning to reopen their not-for-profit organizations. You specialize in looking at business processes. What are the most important things that organizational leaders need to be thinking about right now?
Well, thank you for the opportunity of joining you today for coffee. And I think three things are most important in my mind, looking out at what I'm discussing with my clients. So really, first, taking care of your customers and or clients as they come to your organization. Second is taking care of your employees and members of your team. And third is, how are you going to then handle what I believe would be a flow and onslaught of additional services that will be requested and required from many organizations? Because we all know that we have not won this battle. We're just trying to take a time out. And there's still a lot of fears and uncertainty out there. And so people are still concerned about their personal health and the opportunity of spreading the virus. So we have to be, I think, conscious regarding all those factors, both for our clients, customers, and for our team members and staff.
That's a really good point. We also have with us today Christine Dixon. Christine is the executive director of Project Hope, a multi-service agency in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston that provides low-income women and children with access to education, jobs, housing support, and emergency services. Christine has been with Project Hope since 2011 and has been the executive director there since 2017 and has extensive experience working with children and families around issues of homelessness. And at Project Hope has led multiple initiatives in partnership with agencies and city stakeholders. Thank you so much for being with us today, Christine. Tell us a little bit about how Project Hope has adapted in the COVID era.
Sure. Thank you, Peta. Thank you, Cynthia, Rebecca. Thanks so much for having me on Coffee Time this morning. I'm excited to join you and excited to meet you as well, Cornell. Project Hope has adjusted to this crisis by providing the services that we have to families in our community for the past 30 years and doing it in a new way. We provide housing services and shelter supports, workforce and education programming, and we have training and a program for family childcare providers. So at the way that we've adjusted is really our housing services have moved to remote work with families. We're continuing to provide housing search assistance and work to prevent homelessness, prevent evictions, and doing this in remote ways. We closed our building, which was so hard for us. It's a really lively, important part of the community. And so we had to close those doors, but we let people know through a variety of ways that we were still there for the community. And we were working in these new ways. We've shifted our workforce and education programming to remote learning. And so we've been able to continue to provide essential services that Project Hope is known for, and people reach out to us to seek. And we're doing this in this new world, this new way of providing services.
And what are you thinking about as you're thinking about reopening the building?
Well, we know we're not going to rush into this. We're not ready now to reopen our doors. It's really important for us to think responsibly and cautiously about the plan to reopen. Our community has been hit pretty hard by this virus. Project Hope is located in the Dudley Street community of Roxbury, North Dorchester. And as a community of color, communities of color have been hit terribly by this virus. And so I think it's our responsibility to be cautious and protect our staff, protect our community and the families that we serve by taking very thoughtful and slow steps towards reopening. So we throughout this crisis, we've been working with our leadership team, meeting regularly to ensure that the quality of services during the crisis could continue in a remote way. And now we've pulled together a reopening task force that includes staff that represent programs, human resources, facilities, and our partners. We share space in the building with one of our partners, longtime partner, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, and they'll be part of our reopening task force as well, because we want to think together and be thoughtful about the way we can continue to provide service to the community and continue both of our organizations' work, but in a way that continues to protect the staff, the families, and the community that we serve.
Christine, I'm curious, what are you talking about with your teams, aside from, making sure that things are sanitized and there is low risk for transmission of the virus? What other things are you considering as you put the task force together, which is a great idea, by the way? You don't have to do this alone. Your team knows what it needs. And so what a great idea.
Yeah. We've never done this, right? None of us have. It's such a new area. But I guess the thing that I'm finding that's reassuring is that we all are dealing with the same thing. So yes, task force is one of the purposes of that is to get input from across the organization. There's so many factors to consider. I've also really been finding connecting with other executive directors, other local nonprofits has been so helpful as we're all dealing with these same issues. Really taking the time to think this through together has been incredibly helpful. So some of the things that we're thinking about is during these last couple months, we've been able to work remotely. How have we done that? And what can we do to strengthen that in any way? And be able to, if there was any area that we felt we weren't able to do it as well as we were when we were in person, well, let's really continue to focus on that and strengthen that area, and so that we can continue to keep all of our staff working from home. And so when we think about, I know the mayor has said June 1st would be the soonest that office space could be opening up in Boston. I think for us, that won't look very different than it does today. That might be the first phase in Boston. And for us, I think our phase 1 is going to look very similar to to where we are now. So it's supporting the staff to continue to work from home, and then thinking about only the most essential people that would be able, that would need access to the building. We'll be thinking about the numbers of people. Maybe, in early phases, we might be talking about just like a handful of people that are in the building. And even within those staff members, what area of the building they normally are. I'm really thinking about the spaces within the building and spacing people out in that way. We'll think about start times so that people aren't all coming in at 9 a.m. and then there's sort of a cluster in the lobby. And we'll have to think very carefully about the gathering areas in our building. And actually, we're talking about making adjustments to the physical space and even the chairs and in the kitchen area, which it's so counterintuitive to the way we normally think, because this is an important part of what we do, is come together and eat together. But right now, it's kind of the worst way that we could end up actually contributing to the spread of this virus. So removing chairs from spaces, thinking about how the chairs are laid out in conference rooms, and removing some so that we're sending the message that this is like the maximum number of people in the space, and this is the way that the chairs could be aligned. We'll think a little bit about our exits and entrances and whether it does make sense to have one designated as an entrance and one as an exit, thinking about stairwells and elevators. There's a lot to think about.
There is a lot. Cornell is nodding his head.
What else?
What are you hearing, Cornell? What are nonprofits grappling with?
Well, I think as was identified earlier, Cynthia, is definitely doing a great job discussing that. There are a number of areas that was prompted by the comments that were being made regarding Project Hope. Is one of the things I would suggest is taking a walkthrough physically after you consciously go through the design. Also do walkthroughs in order to see whether it really starts to work and the plans shape out, as well as signage is important in order to help people understand kind of which way things are going and that sort of thing. And I think as we're looking in this environment, I would offer and suggest that all organizations need to continue on with the culture change that we've all started to experience in order to maintain the safety and continued safety of their staff and their clients and personnel. For example, very quickly, we've become accustomed to using masks. Well, gee, maybe you want to continue having masks. And so if you want to continue having masks, that needs to be modeled throughout your organization. It needs to be understood. And perhaps I would suggest maybe a couple of warm-up events in which you have small groups of your customer set or your clients kind of coming in for a small event and kind of letting them know that masks need to be maintained, because we want to protect everyone. And so I think people can start to capture those messages and continue that cultural flow moving forward.
Yeah, I remember, Cornell, we were talking recently. You also talked about infrastructure. So some organizations may have gotten laptops just to deal with what we thought was a temporary situation. But if this is going to be permanent, or there's a much longer term plan, then maybe relooking at our infrastructure and making sure that your staff can still work from home long term and that they have the technology.
Well, I think it's not only important for the staff, but also, as we spoke briefly before we came on, that your client base has to have the same technological capabilities. And unfortunately, many clients, depending upon your environment, used to go to the library in order to have internet access. Well, that's no longer available. So now I think it's starting to become very important for everyone, if you will, to have access to the internet and have computer capabilities, especially for education, for young people, in regards to trying to minimize the digital divide, if you will, as well as now there's so much that can be available through the internet. It's almost required.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Cornell, we were talking at length with one of our viewers from Vermont about accessibility in libraries and the use of the resources there and the limitations that we're seeing as a result of those library doors being temporarily closed. The idea of reopening our doors is very interesting. Just as we're preparing for this resurface, this opening of our doors in this pandemic, we never really stop serving the folks who rely on us at our nonprofits and, our clients and customers. And not only are we continuing that service in a different way, but we're serving in a greater capacity than before with an influx in referrals and people needing our services. I remember back in 2008, I was an executive director, and we had a really difficult time keeping up with the people who needed our help that we were currently serving. And then that influx in referrals and that different service that people were requesting of us as a result of what was going on with the recession. So creating and accommodating a space for those joining us in this re-entry, I love how you are, both Christine and Cornell, touching upon that, because those are things that we might not think about as we're going in as customers and clients do this re-entry. So not only do we have to maintain our services with limited resources, but we also experience that influx, and we have to accommodate that as well. So I'm curious, Christine, are you seeing more of a need for your services right now than you had pre-pandemic? And how are you adjusting to that outside of the measures that you were just talking about with the spacing of chairs and all of that?
Rebecca, that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. And Cynthia and Cornell, you both bring up the issue of technology. I think these are both really connected. We typically serve about 700 families a year through Project Hope. And at any given time, it's maybe 400 families or so that we're serving. What we saw now is that our initial step when this crisis hit was to reach out to all of the families that we were connected with throughout our programs, to check in, to see what supports or needs they might have. And typically at any point in time, there might be a percentage of the families that are in crisis, and that our staff are really directing their energies towards supporting and helping with housing crisis that they're dealing with, or other issue that the family might be experiencing. And what our staff was saying now is that all of the families that we were reaching out to are in crisis. They've experienced, families have experienced job loss. They're struggling with food insecurity and concern about housing. There were measures that were taken in Boston and to stay evictions, to allow for evictions not to go forward, so families wouldn't be evicted during the crisis. But families and individuals that are tenants in the city worry about not paying their rent this month, and then when the moratorium on eviction ends, how will they be able to catch up with the rent that they've fallen behind? And then there won't be the resources out there to support them with those evictions. So we're seeing now our staff we've actually received a number of donations from various sources, National Grid, United Way, other private foundations. We've been really lucky to receive some donations to support the families during this time. So we've been delivering groceries and gift cards for emergency funds. And I mean, I think we typically prevent about 50 evictions a year. I think last year was maybe 50 something evictions. We saw in the month of April over 20 actual evictions that we were able to prevent in 1 month.
Just in April. Wow.
A full year typically. And so we are expecting that trend to continue. We expect that with so much job loss that people have experienced, that we're going to see a real need for our workforce programming, for job training, for our education programming, as people who have lost their jobs may be looking for retraining and maybe even shifting careers, as we better understand who's going to be hiring now in this economy. So we've already seen some of those shifts, and are working to make sure that we've got the right employer partners in place, building those relationships or new pathways for people in this new economy.
It's going to be a different economy,
It is.
Some of those jobs might not exist.
Right.
Um,
And technology is a huge piece of this, right? As you both were suggesting, we bought a number of laptops for staff, printers for people to make sure that they can keep doing their work from home, and got donations. Life Science Cares has been wonderful working with them. They've donated a number of Chromebooks. We've distributed over 40 or so Chromebooks to our students and participants so that they can continue their learning and their job seeking.
I have some questions,
Go
Peter.
ahead.
Do you want to read them?
You can read the question. Go ahead.
Okay. So Tom Bicklin, welcome, Tom. Thank you for joining us for coffee time. He asks, do you think your staff might require some free mental health support upon the return? And then he has a second question for Cornell. So I'm guessing this first question is for Christine, and then when Christine's done, we'll ask Cornell for some additional insight.
It's such an interesting question. You know, I had not even thought of that, but the staff themselves are impacted in multiple ways. So, yeah.
Should I start this one and then Cornell? Okay. Yeah, I think we've seen that now, especially our staff that are on the front line working directly with families. It's really it's traumatic for them to hear story after story, and so we've been just really intentional about supporting our staff during this time and providing access to our employer assistance program, self-care tips, and we actually just recently distributed a staff survey to get a better understanding of what staff was experiencing right now and what additional supports people might need. And so we're learning from that, and we're taking those types of steps. But we're absolutely seeing this. This is a huge issue that I think is so important to attend to. And even those staff who are a little bit removed and might be directors and managers, I think they're spending a lot of their time supporting the staff that are doing the direct service work. So it's felt throughout the organization.
Very good. And then Tom's follow-up question is for Cornell. What is the most important first step to determine if staff is in fact ready to return? An example, some staff might be so impacted they are not ready to return to work. How do you assess the mental health resilient outlook for staff as well?
Well, I believe it was touched on a little earlier in the comments, is that you have to reach out and touch people in order to understand and talk with them in order to find out where they are, because we all have continued our lives through this period of time. There have been losses from personnel and family. There's been other people in your family who've been impacted. Everyone's had their own changes in how you deal with the shut-in opportunities. Some have been positive experiences. Some perhaps have not been quite so positive. So I think you have to do an assessment of your staff once they come in to make sure everyone has space to reflect, to reject, to share, in order to understand where they are. So, because we're all coming back in this from different places, not the same place we were back in March.
It's interesting you say reflect and reject. I think that's really important to note, because that shows how important it is to take feedback from your employees to see if what you're proposing or what you are offering is meeting their needs, is accommodating, and it's also taking into consideration what their recommendations are. I really like that, Cornell. Thank you.
I have to admit, I have not thought about the mental health of those returning. We talk a lot about, now we've had access to the personal lives of our employees in a way that we didn't have access before. And we might know information we didn't know before. And how do you deal with that during the pandemic? And I thank you guys, because I haven't thought about what happens when we return to the office. That's another disruption.
Wow, that's another episode.
All right, well, I'm coming back.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think some of the equity issues that we've touched on here are so interesting. Christine made the point of, as an organization that is operating in a community of color, our responsibility to be cautious about spreading the virus is that much higher. So even as these agencies are trying to work in communities, there's another layer of thinking, how do we not reinforce inequality? And, the point that Cornell made about making sure that people have access to technology. So you're now in some ways maybe doing the work that a partner organization might have been doing that you didn't realize, right? So maybe you were depending on libraries or some other agencies to help people get online, and that's just increasing the burden on every organization. So,
How do we,
and on the
Cornell, and we have about 4 minutes left. How do we deal with this potential uptake? What can organizations do? This is serious.
I would suggest that the critical element is that every organization has to now view themselves as being an innovative culture within their organization. You're going to have to try things. You're going to have to listen to all of your employees, as Christine said she's working with her team, in order to come together, get everyone's eyes and ears on given topics, because you don't have all the information. You don't have all the concerns. You don't have all the challenges everyone's been going through. So you have to develop an innovative culture within your organization and just try to hold on and try to make your clients as happy as you can, as quickly as you can, and just let everybody know that they need be a little more considerate about your time as well, just because there's so many more people wanting your services.
Yeah, you posted a great article on your LinkedIn page, and you do it for the New Haven Register here in the state of Connecticut. And it's a very interesting concept, this flow problem theory, which sounds big and sophisticated and complicated, but you really bring it down to nonprofits or organizations in general can take the philosophy and apply it within their organization, and really looking at the flow and how do we continue to provide the customer service that our families deserve when they come to our brick and mortar.
Well, if I may, Christine gave us a great run up to that when she talked about the number of evictions that she had managed last year, 50 something, and this year 20 something in April alone. And so the question would go to her is that how did her organization and staff react to the higher volume than usually expected, where usually she was expecting maybe 5 or 6 a month. Now it's like 20, and that will probably continue. So hopefully it doesn't require too much shift in resources, but certainly will have to be some way to accommodate with new innovations in order to make that happen.
And that's not just stressful to the families, it's also stressful to the staff.
It is.
So how do we think about these additional constraints on the process?
Yeah.
When we were experiencing the recession and we had that intake and influx in referrals, we had also some cuts to our contracts, because remember, the nonprofit itself wasn't the only entity with resources that were thinning and limited. The funders who were funding us, their resources were starting to thin and limit, and so they were cutting the resources that they were providing us. So we really had to focus in on what strategies and practices we were putting into place to support all of the organization, the people we serve, the employees, but also have a strategy for responding to those funding cuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's going to have to be another show.
Yeah, that's another show. But it all fits together. This is a really great conversation we're having this morning. We have to continue this. We need
to continue this, because I'm realizing there is so much to learn here about the equity issues and the organizational issues, and how all of these issues are intersecting at this moment in time.
Yeah.
I think that's my big takeaway of this episode, is to think about how organizations themselves that are working in vulnerable communities are seeing the impacts of this, and that has its own way of reinforcing and accentuating inequalities. Cynthia, what's your big takeaway?
Who did you ask? I'm sorry.
You, go ahead, Cynthia.
I'm glad to have Cornell here, because in the first episode I talked about his article. So my big takeaway is I've been blown away by this flow problem theory, and it was so nice to have you on. And Christine has an amazing organization, and it's been such a pleasure. But I do want to lend my takeaway to a comment from the chat box from Tom Ficklin, where he gives us a resource on the inequity issue and becoming an anti-racist. I would super recommend having staff consider going to Ibram Kendi's website. So we have not gone to that website, but that is something that Tom is offering as we continue to think about what the post-COVID future is going to look like. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Rebecca, what is your takeaway?
Well, thank you, Christine. Thank you, Cornell, for joining us. We have to continue this. We're just scratching the surface of a great conversation here. And so much of what you talked about today, people can put into practice, and it's really, really helpful for them. My big takeaway is, having gone through a similar experience and just listening and participating today, is that the problems that we're facing, we may not solve them all, but we can attack them one at a time, approach them one at a time. And if we all work together, we can do it and get through it. It's relying upon the resources that both of you shared, and the good work that you're all doing, and having these community conversations that we're having to help people and support them and let them know, there's other people around you to help you do this work. You don't have to do it by yourself. And I think the more reassurance that we can offer communities, the better prepared they're going to be for this reopening. So this was an awesome episode. I'm really going to put this one in my think tank. I hope we do continue this conversation. It's so helpful.
Christine and Cornell, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And viewers, please leave your takeaways in the comments, as we appreciate your thoughts and feedback. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.